Well, welcome back to Scaling Up. I'm your host, John Reed. Today, we're tackling a crucial puzzle many business owners struggle with. How do sales, operations, and finance break down the barriers and truly collaborate? It's a question that, when answered, sets your businesses up to scale. Joining me today are two experts that have mastered the art of cross-functional teamwork. Martin Cunningham, a seasoned Fractional Chief Financial Officer, and Rich McLaughlin, an EOS Implementer with a knack for harmonizing business systems. Together, we'll uncover the secrets to uniting these critical departments.
You're listening to Scaling Up, a podcast for business leaders.
Gentlemen, let's turn silos into synergies.
Right. Great question, John. And I think you're right. I think there's always challenges around making sure those handoffs between sales, ops, and finance are going as smoothly as possible. But since you're at the front end of that process, I thought it maybe makes sense to start with you. And what have you seen at the front end from a sales perspective that feeds into this challenge?
Yeah, a great starting point. Well, there's a number of gaps that any business needs to make sure it gets covered. I guess I'd first start off with strategy, start at the top level. And from a sales perspective, you want to make sure that your sales strategy is in alignment with all the other departments, but certainly with operations and finance. But specifically around sales, just to highlight the point with a couple stories. In my journey in sales leadership, I've run into a whole host of different situations that speak to this issue. One or two that probably can serve as good examples is how to compensate salespeople. Right, we know that they generally are motivated by fame and fortune. Not to generalize too much, but if you're paying them properly and if you are recognizing their achievements properly, then they usually are in alignment with behaving the way that you want them to. So I've been in a variety of different types of companies and leadership positions, and certainly in consulting capacity. And I would say that two examples. One, in an early startup, as an example, collaborating with finance to make sure that sales is executing on the right type of strategy to bring in the right type of revenue that finance and ultimately the corporate leadership wants. For example, in the startup that I was part of, we wanted to just bring all types of revenue. We really didn't care whether it was, in this case, it was a software company, whether it was licensing or services or maintenance, didn't really care. We just wanted to show traction around total revenue coming in the door. So that's how we compensated and incented our salespeople. Just bring in revenue, and we will, when we get mature enough, if you will, down the road, then we'll start differentiating. And that's the other aspect of trying to make sure that you've got the right strategy communications. In a more mature company where you've got multiple products, as an example, you may want to make sure that you are, again, collaborating with finance and operations so that the incentives for the salespeople are such that you've got maybe greater incentives for the salespeople to sell higher margin products. Or if you've just announced a new product launch, you want to emphasize sales of that particular product to the market, and then you've got greater incentives for the salespeople to look for ways to sell that product. So it depends on the maturity and the incentives, the maturity and the strategy of the company, and certainly inclusive of collaborating with finance and operations to make sure that you've got the right structure for your sales department to go execute in accordance with your business strategy. So just in relation to that, Martin, do you see where a similar type of prioritization occurs within finance?
I certainly have, John. In my world and in certain circles, when we look at working with the sales team and ultimately the operations team, we want to make sure that the sales team is incentivized properly to sell the products that are the most profitable and yielding the best result for the organization. And that could be product launch, as you had mentioned. It could be higher margin products. It could also be certain products that are simply easier to transport through the supply chain. And it's important to incentivize the sales team to move the product or sell the product that achieves the best outcome for the organization. And in working with the sales team, we can incentivize through volume incentives or other means to promote that behavior. We certainly don't want to have loss leaders, promoted and incentivized by the sales team, and all they're doing is racking up statistics and pushing sales volume. I encountered a challenge in a company that I stepped into that really enjoyed using the buy one, get one strategy for selling and promotions. And that caused a number of challenges. The first being that there was no change in the incentives provided to the sales team. As a result, the sales team was pushing the product that was buy one, get one. The volume was doubling. Sales team was making a fortune on incentives, but the product was losing money because you had half as much revenue and twice as much cost. So working close hand in hand with the sales team is very important to making sure that those types of lifts and those types of promotions are important and valuable. But those things should theoretically sell themselves. So we want to make sure the sales team is cross-pollinating, cross-selling, doing some other activities that might make sense to build sales volume and ultimately net sales. The one thing I did mention was supply chain, incentivizing the sales team to sell product that is simply cheaper and faster to move. And the only way that you can really do that is to bring the sales team and the operations team together. So that is one thing that the finance team can do very well is take a look at the costs associated with producing and transporting the product. And making sure that the highest margin products are the ones that are scheduled to be produced and ones that can be fulfilled. In addition, when you have buy one, get ones, or you have heavy promotions, you know that there's going to be a high volume of sales, not necessarily dollars, but those orders still have to be fulfilled. And it's important to utilize the operations team to do that. And I'm just wondering from Rich's standpoint, what challenges he's seen and what kind of strategies he's implemented in those types of situations.
Yeah, so I've seen the same kind of thing and how it impacts ops when sales and ops are not aligned. And the one that comes to mind for me was kind of an inside sales group that the current standard they were trying to maintain with customers was that they would get a response to them on some testing that they were asked for the group to do within 6 weeks. And suddenly that response time was stretching out to 9 weeks. And so then both the inside sales group as well as the testing group started playing the blame game where they were pointing, saying, well, it's because of our inside sales, and the inside sales said, well, it's because of testing. And so they got into their corporate salute, as we like to say, and just got back into the finger pointing back and forth. And what I needed to do was get both of them both groups in the room and say, let's look at the process. Let's get out of the finger pointing and blaming and look at the process and figure out where's it breaking down. And sure enough, once you get them off that, focused on the process and off each other, we found that there were some very simple fixes we could make to the process to get that response time down back to where it needed to be.
You brought up a point that I think is pretty important, and I'm sure is evident in a lot of different types of companies and sizes of companies. That's tension, within the organization, where you've got people thinking that they're doing their job or not, and somebody else, trying to overlay on top of that. And you kind of brought that issue up. Is that something that you've seen and addressed before?
Definitely. I mean, so that tension, and a lot of my EOS clients, that tension comes up in terms of, there's the founder often is very much what we would call a visionary, who's big on selling new ideas, finding new clients, introducing new products and services, big ideas, and yet they have to balance that tension with the person who has to actually make it happen, which in our world we call them the integrator, who has to kind of then get all those functional groups working smoothly to make sure that we can meet that demand. So, again, I'm sure you've seen this too, John, where if you have sales selling more than with the systems can accommodate, that poses its own issues. So I'm wondering if you've seen that tension.
Well, so I've seen that in a number of ways. So specifically within a sales organization, you want to make sure that you've got clear lines of responsibility. And so in a more mature company, when I say mature, I mean just a broader number of people in the sales organization. You may have folks that are hunters and farmers. That's a common terminology used to try to differentiate between trying to find new business and to get business out of existing business. Sometimes farmers are referred to as account managers for existing clients. And, that's a good way to try to make sure you're optimizing your talent. Somebody that's good at knocking on new doors and trying to find new business and new logos. There's a bit of skill set there that may not be present as much in somebody that's more comfortable with going in and building relationships in an existing account and looking for new business that way. So, different personalities, different approaches, but you want to make sure that those roles are differentiated and defined so that you don't have crossover where people aren't unsure of what they should be doing. If you got an existing account and there's an account manager in there, as an example, you don't necessarily want to have conflict with somebody looking for new business. So have a clear, defined role in what that account manager should be doing in developing relationships and looking for new business, as opposed to having somebody else come in is, one of the ways that I've found in trying to reduce that tension. You also want to make sure that you have clear definition of territories. And sometimes this isn't done as much as, in my opinion, it should be done. I walked into one situation where it was almost like a free for all. Anybody that came in, it was like a car dealership in many ways, where whoever's up gets the next lead. And okay, that can work, but if you've got defined territories where if it's in, it's just some geographical location, New Jersey, it's well defined who covers New Jersey or some zip code, so that you can hold that person accountable for the activity that occurs in that geography. And that's the other point. You want to have an ability to make sure you can measure the performance in a defined way, so that, again, you're not having crossover and tension between folks in your department. And certainly that spills over into making sure that you don't have tension between departments, where if you've got issues with sales and issues with operations not being able to deliver, well, you want to make sure that that connection is established and communicated, so that you're not making promises to customers that operations can't deliver on. But there's a finance component to that as well. And Martin, I'm not sure whether you've got a couple examples where this tension can be relieved.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just to begin, you've hit on a couple of points that I think are very critical to the success of an organization. One is, the definition of roles and responsibilities throughout the process. Sales certainly has the hunter type mentality that you speak to bring in the sales, and the operations has an obligation to fulfill it, with the resources available to it. And finance has the responsibility for making sure that it's done so in a prudent and profitable manner, while minimizing the risk to the organization. And, I think that, from the experiences that I've had with my clients is, with responsibility comes clear communication, and the other thing that you mentioned, which was clear measurement. Developing KPIs for each of the three areas here. On the sales team, you talk about territorial, sales volume, and there are a lot of other metrics you can look at too in terms of product mix, and you also look at market analysis to make sure that those territories you have a fair benchmark, where one sales representative may be in Manhattan, the other one might be in Wichita, Kansas, and they're two completely different markets, and therefore should sell different products and might have a different measure of success. From an operational standpoint, most metrics are pretty straightforward in terms of understanding your unit cost, understanding the amount to transport and warehouse the particular product, and the lead time necessary to fulfill it. And in between there is customer service and customer support, and making sure that the organization provides top-notch customer service while arguably having minimal impact because there's minimal need for customer support or customer issues or disputes to have to deal with. So a lot of different ways to measure the company. I've worked with companies that have been challenged in any one of those areas. Starting with customer service, to me, is probably the most important piece, because that's going to be it's the pressure valve. So if a product is late, that they're the front lines. If an order needs to be placed and needs a rush delivery, they're the front lines. So they're the ones that ultimately help support the sales team and deliver on the operational expectations, and making sure that those expectations are meeting the market demand while at the same time full well understanding what the capabilities of the business are. I think, Rich, I'm sure you've had a number of different examples in your career of that type of circumstance. Can you tell us a little bit about a couple?
Sure. I mean, I think because I'm working again with mostly smaller businesses, a lot of them are family run. And so you run into this issue of structure and do we got the right people in the right seats? So we were touching upon it. In a lot of large organizations, they're going to be a little bit more sophisticated in that space and finding what's needed. But in a lot of mom and pop and small businesses, family run businesses, it just kind of evolves over time. And then you find that when we start to lay out what's the right structure, they start to realize we may not have the right person in that role. And so that becomes a very interesting conversation to tee up with that leadership team about what are we going to do about that? We clearly identify we need somebody who really knows sales in this sales role, or really knows finance in the finance role. And we're saying that we don't really have that person there right now. So that often is a very, very tricky moment that we have to work with, especially in those family businesses. John, how about you? What else have you seen around those tensions and trying to manage those tensions?
Yeah, you mentioned a number of them. Just making sure that the right people are in the right seats is huge, and it relates to another issue that I think is extremely important to make sure that gaps get filled, and that's communication. And we talked about it in some of our other examples, but I think to maybe put a bit more focus on it, it's obvious that if you're not communicating with your other departments, then you have dysfunction in the company. And so one of the things that I've tried to make sure happens is the sales team communicates their expectations, and it's up and down the food chain. I call it a cadence of accountability. So within the department, me as a sales leader, I expect to have communications to my direct reports that report to me on their activity, on overseeing, their ability to meet the objectives that have been set out for them for the year, for the quarter, whatever the case might be, and making sure that their pipeline is full in order to be able to meet their quarterly and annual goals as examples. But then, of course, as a sales leader, I have a responsibility to communicate up the food chain as well. So the CEO or founder needs to make sure that he or she are making solid business decisions, based on, what the forecast looks like. And that, of course, relates to operations and finance as well. So having that lines of communication within a department and then across to your peer groups and up and down the food chain within the company is extremely important. Let me just give you one or two examples relative to communication between departments, and this is relative to finance in this case. Part of my experience is in software. A large part of my experience actually is in software, and software deals have evolved over time as far as what is optimal for the company and what is optimal for the customer. Today, the typical approach is a SaaS, a service as a software as a service. But in years past, enterprise software companies would sell based on a perpetual license and maintenance contract. So those days are, for the most part, gone, although not extinct totally. But in structuring a SaaS deal, a lot of elements go into it. And, how long do you want the agreement to be in effect? 1 year deal, 3 year deal, those are typical timelines. And to optimize what is best for the company, it might be, we want 3 year deals because we want to know what our deliverables are over that time period. We can have a better handle on our cost structures, et cetera, et cetera. But to put that 3 year deal together, you're asking the client to sign up for a 3 year commitment. Well, what's the balance? Well, if you're not collaborating and communicating with finance on how to structure that deal and how to make sure that you've got that right balance of what's right for the company, our company selling the software, and what's right for the client. For instance, you might want to ramp the payments, just one approach. Have lower payments on year one, then ramp up to year two, ramp up to 3 year. If that's the approach you want to take, great. That might work for the client, but does that work for a company? Well, you need to collaborate with finance to make that kind of deal happen. So that's how it relates to finance. And the clear one is, it relates to operations. Many times, again, in software, you're selling services. And part of the closing function might be, hey, I've got our implementation team available in this time window. Can we conclude the contract so that we can use those available resources and get the project started quickly? Well, clearly you want to make sure that those resources are indeed available. And if you haven't had that conversation with operations, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So anyway, there's a lot of elements to that communication topic that are departmental and then interdepartmental and then organizational up and down the food chain that you need to make sure you're communicating with. So, Martin, any insights that you have from the finance point of view relative to making sure we got the right communications?
Absolutely. And John, I have worked with the sales team on working out long-term and short-term sales agreements and service agreements that, really depending on the business, it might serve, the company's best interest to do something very short and keep renewing because you don't know what the product is going to, and how the product is going to develop or unfold over time. So it might go obsolete very quickly. It might be a long-term agreement because you want to look at the capital investment required to launch that product. So it really depends on the nature of the product, the nature of the agreement, the customer relationship, a lot of different factors. And then, of course, you're looking at macroeconomic issues like inflation and the overall economy, because you certainly don't want to lock yourself into an agreement at a very low rate of increase in a highly inflationary environment, or vice versa, where you can really create some long-term cash flow issues and risk in the future. In terms of communication, I have a really good example that really came together for me in a very interesting way that involved both sales and operations. And it all revolved around the ability to communicate with each other. And everybody won, especially the customer. And that's ultimately the punchline right there, is that everybody wins in this story. And the story begins at a pharmaceutical company that I supported and a client of mine. And a client had reached out to their sales representative and said, I've got this product and, this drug and I don't have a need for it. What can we do with it? And, sales team said, well, rather than say no, they said, well, let me think about it. And then they came back to me and the operations team and said, well, here's our problem. What I also knew was that the production capacity for that particular company was in excess of 100%. So they were busting at the seams. So could we use that inventory? Absolutely. So the challenge there was with operations in the regulatory environment of pharmaceutical to determine, the quality and make sure that the product was in good enough condition to resell. And so we devised a plan collectively to buy back the inventory at a fraction of its price and then turn around and sell it for, say a reasonable discount, but at a profit for the organization. So the customer, got the benefit of getting some proceeds back and not having to dispose of this drug and the costs associated with it. The sales team obviously had a win because it was a good relationship with their client. The operations team was given a little bit of a reprieve because they were facing some production challenges in a very good and healthy way. And we were able to deliver to customer B who needed the product right away. And we did so in a cash flow positive and profitable manner. And it all came down to the ability to coordinate and communicate with each other. Rich, have you seen anything like that? Tell us a little bit about some of your experience.
Sure. I mean, too many. where often, and it starts out maybe where incentives are misaligned, right? Where you guys kind of mentioned them already, where sales might be incented a particular way and they don't realize that it causes some downstream effects on ops and finance. But generally, to your guys' point, when you get the right people in the room and you tee up what the issue is and you look at the process, you look at the incentives, you get them to focus on what's the end result for our customers, then you kind of pull them out of what I would call their parochial interests and get them to focus on the bigger picture. Things tend to work themselves out. So half the time it's getting the right people in the room and make sure they understand what's the implications of the trend we're on our customers. And that usually wakes them up to what we need to do to fix it.
Yeah. Well, so this has been an enlightening conversation, certainly touching on a number of areas relative to how three very important aspects of any business, really, independent of the size, need to certainly operate within their own domains, but also make sure that they are coordinating and collaborating with their brethren to make sure that the company as a whole is operating as best it can and most effective and efficient. Martin, Rich, thank you both for sharing your expertise and experiences with us today. It's been certainly enlightening to learn about the transformative power of collaboration across sales, operation, finance. To our listeners, we hope you found today's discussion as valuable as we did. Remember, breaking down silos is not just beneficial, it's essential for scaling your business. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. Before we break, Martin, how can people get a hold of you if they would like to do so?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me, John. This has been truly a pleasure and an honor. I can be reached at my email address, Martin C, MARTINC, at quiverandarrowllc.com. That's QUIVERANDARROWLLC.com. All right now.
Great. Thank you, Martin. And Rich, how can folks reach you?
Yeah, same. And thank you again, John, for inviting us in. So same thing, Rich.McLaughlin at EOSworldwide.com.
Great. All right. Well, again, thank you both for helping to shine a light on this extremely important aspect of scaling businesses. For our listeners, stay tuned for more insightful episodes of Scaling Up, where we help you grow your business smarter and faster. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.